State your name.
Patrick Guerrero,
Solemnly swear
solemnly swear,
under the penalty of perjury
under the penalty of perjury,
that the testimony you shall give in the matter at hand
that the testimony I shall give in the matter at hand
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Sarge, and thank you, Mr. Guerrero. May I remind you that you are under oath, and so please answer the questions that members may pose as truthfully and accurate as possible. And with that, and no objections from the members, I will recognize you for your opening statement. And I believe the copies will be sent out to the members. Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Kindly ask, seeing that I'm more than 6 feet apart, is it okay if everyone comfortable? Is it okay if I just leave my mask off? Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Ralph Yumo, Vice Chairman J.P. Sablan, distinguished members of the Special Committee on Federal Assistance and Disaster-Related Funding. My name is Patrick Guerrero, and I'm the Governor's Authorized Representative, also known as the GAR, for the COVID-19 event. It is my pleasure to be here today to answer any questions that you may have on the ongoing response to COVID-19 as it relates to my duties and responsibilities as the GAR. On March 13, 2020, President Trump declared a nationwide emergency pursuant to Section 501B of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, in short known as the Stafford Act. Under the President's emergency declaration, all states, territories, and federally recognized tribes became immediately eligible for FEMA public assistance, Category B, emergency protective measures as authorized by Section 403 of the Stafford Act and funded by the Disaster Relief Fund. On April 1, 2020, a major disaster declaration was granted to the CNMI, further opening up the opportunity for additional programs and funding through reimbursements for as far back as January 20, 2020, the start of the incident period. For the first time in the United States history, there are 114 concurrent major disaster declarations, at least one in every single state, 5 territories, 1 tribal government, and the District of Columbia. A little on our COVID-19 response efforts. In disaster events such as typhoons, the CNMI Homeland Security and Emergency Management is the pivot point for the response operations and coordinates all local agencies. In this pandemic, the activities are like no other disaster before. A major public health emergency requiring an unprecedented response effort, to say the least. The Governor's COVID-19 Task Force, under the leadership of Mr. Warren Villagomez, who is also the director of CHCC's Public Health Emergency and Preparedness Program, became the fulcrum of interagency coordination efforts for all response activities, working side by side with CHCC Chief Executive Officer Ms. Esther Muña as the public health official. CHCC has been responding to the potential impact of the latest coronavirus since its discovery in December and continues to drive our whole of government approach here in the CNMI with the help of the task force. Since then, together we have built an integrated system, a web of protection and containment of the COVID-19 disease. As of today, we have tested well over 13,000 of our residents and travelers entering the CNMI through the community-based testing, port arrival testing, and contract tracing efforts. We will continue to find ways to reach out to more members of the community and help contain the spread of COVID-19 in the CNMI. At the onset of this disaster, HSEM, the COVID-19 Task Force, and CHCC joined forces to quickly identify the resources required to respond to the threat of the coronavirus disease, whether it would be personal protective equipment and medical supplies, medical equipment, quarantine facilities, additional medical staff, additional operations personnel, or the need to increase capacity at our lone hospital. We worked as a unified coordination group to achieve what we could. In early March and through June, guided by the Incident Command System and the established procurement procedures that both CHCC and Homeland Security Emergency Management deploys during disaster response, the CNMI competed for scarce global resources. The state of New York at the time could not procure the quantity of PPEs required to provide their frontline workers, nor the ventilators to treat patients. It was a scary time for the CNMI. If New York was having challenges, what more could we expect for our islands in the middle of the Pacific and at the end of the nation's supply chain? Early on in this emergency, as I said in our last hearing here, spoke to one of my contacts at FEMA. This is the message they gave us. We're on our own, get what you can, and we'll help you later with the reimbursement process. To quote FEMA Administrator Mr. Pete Gaynor in his recent testimony to the U.S. House of Representatives, this is what he had to say. During more common disasters, FEMA typically manages abundant resources to support a specific state or territory. In responding to COVID-19, FEMA has met the more difficult task of managing shortages of critical medical supplies and equipment such as PPE, ventilators, swabs, and the chemical reagents required for testing. This effort alone has presented an historic challenge for FEMA and its federal partners. COVID-19 has been a global crisis. Leaders across over 150 countries have simultaneously been competing for the same medical supplies. Concurrently, American medical professionals on the front lines of the pandemic have required an exponentially increased volume of PPE and other medical supplies that on average, the U.S. began consuming a year's worth of PPE in a matter of weeks. FEMA worked closely with HHS to ensure that locations in danger of running out of supplies receive life-saving equipment from the federal government's reserve national stockpile as administered by HHS. This is the reason why the CNMI went out on its own to build its own stockpile of resources. In early March, before we had our first confirmed case, we were at the bottom of the list of states and territories that would receive any resources. We were often notified that certain quantities of PPEs, test kits, and other supplies were on their way here, only to see those numbers decrease or disappear as they got closer to our islands. Apparently, other states and territories needed our resources more than we needed them and was intercepted during its transit over here. One of the first priorities for FEMA and HHS was to increase surge capacity at hospitals. In order to accomplish this objective, FEMA offered the services of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to work closely with the CNMI to construct alternate care sites. An alternate care site is a building such as a civic convention center that is temporarily converted into a medical treatment facility during a public health emergency to provide additional space if traditional healthcare institutions are filled beyond capacity. Here in the CNMI, we don't have that luxury, we don't have the space, but we were further guided by what was called the ACS, Alternate Care Site Toolkit, that was released by FEMA and HHS in early April to guide states and territories to build out hotels, convert hotels into either an acute care facility or general care facility, depending on what the need of the community was at the time. I digress a little from the written testimony. Just for the record, CHCC has 4 ICU units, and we were given models, projections that at some point we might need 600 ICU beds. We didn't go with USAIDs, however, because what we could get was virtual planning assistance from them, getting on a phone. Nobody wanted to travel. So what we did was we quickly identified local capacity, local engineers, local construction companies to do the work. And the alternative anyways would have been to sign mission assignments with the Department of Defense. And in my experience, usually comes at a high price tag. Concurrently with the build out of Kanoa Resort, the task force also constructed the medical care and treatment sites by repurposing classroom tents from Northern Marianas College, container restroom facilities from Hopwood's Middle School temporary campus, and constructing decontamination showers among other facilities for the purpose of providing an alternate site for CHCC to keep COVID-19 out of its only hospital. Sheltering and quarantine. On March 23rd, a request was made by CEO Esther Muñoz, public health official, seeking FEMA's approval for the use of a non-congregate shelter to contain COVID-19. The NCS was approved, and Kanoa offered 224 guest rooms. It has served and continues to serve as a quarantine isolation facility. In April, with increased travelers to the CNMI, we then signed as well with the Pacific Islands Club in San Antonio, adding another 308 rooms. As response efforts and containment measures constantly evolve, and our quarantine protocols are changing, there is still a need for non-congregate shelter, and although we've terminated a contract with PIC, we're working diligently to open up the Marianas Resort, and I'm sure you have some questions on that later, which I can touch on. In interest of time, I'm just written testimony there is for your reading, and I'll move forward in the testimony here. Cost reimbursements through FEMA, probably the big topic for today. Currently, FEMA will allocate funding to cover 75% of the cost of public assistance, and the CNMI will be responsible for the remaining 25%. However, current projections of eligible costs for reimbursements are well over the threshold for an increase in federal cost share, and I will be making that request to FEMA at the appropriate time. In addition, the U.S. Department of Treasury recently announced that funds provided under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or also known as the CARES Act, may be used to pay for our cost share requirements. I submitted via email FEMA reimbursement summary. I have printed copies here if you need more, and we can discuss that further in detail. What is the outlook? We will continue quarantine of incoming travelers as we've seen the benefit of this protective measure. Approximately 43% of the confirmed positive cases are as a result of testing inbound travelers. We have a system that is working, an integrated system of protective measures that we continue to use through the executive orders and directives of this administration. Testing will continue to be a huge part of our containment efforts in the CNMI until such time that a vaccine can be made available. CHCC has requested support as well to increase its lab testing capacity by building either an extension of the current lab at CHCC or purchasing a mobile lab unit. We are highly considering this request. In closing, I would like to thank the hardworking men and women of the CNMI government, the COVID-19 task force led by Warren Villagomez, Governor Ralph Torres and Lieutenant Governor Arnold Palacios, the Commonwealth Health Corporation led by Esther Muñoz, CNMI Homeland Security led by Gerald Guerrero, our federal partners in FEMA, HHS, and CDC, and our local private sector partners. Many have and continue to risk their health and safety during this unprecedented response, and for that, we should be grateful for and continue to support. Additionally, we are very appreciative of every single person that calls the Marianas their home. We thank them for their commitment to battling this virus by making so many sacrifices and following social distancing and practicing good hygiene. We shall continue to seek everyone's cooperation in our mitigation efforts, and we hope to continue following the latest public health experts' guidelines and recommendations as one community. I would like to thank the legislature for their understanding and support of our efforts. The challenge we will face in the months and years to come as a result of this pandemic is one that will be shared by all, and you will be responsible to continue to lead this community into uncharted territory. Together, we shall fight to contain the spread of this deadly disease today and move forward into economic recovery in the near future, we hope. Chairman Yumo and distinguished members of the Special Committee, thank you for this opportunity to be here before you. I look forward to any questions you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. And for the record, in the list of chain commands, who do you report to? Is it just the task force, or your office is separate from the COVID-19 under FEMA?
Right. I report directly to the governor as the governor's authorized representative.
And I believe there's two other GARs, and what is your position in relative to Miss Virginia and Mr. Angel?
Okay. Um, every disaster declaration by FEMA, or by the President of the United States requires um, a person to be assigned to that disaster as the governor's authorized representative to represent the governor, to act on behalf of the governor for that particular disaster. I know the previous 8 or 9 disasters, it was Virginia Villagomez. So we're both GARs for different disasters. There's still ongoing recovery efforts with U2, Maggut, and Solor, and she's responsible for the functions of the FEMA state agreement.
And thank you. Um, Early on, she did sign for a lot of uh, the contracts that was issued out. So, is there a reason why it was changed, and was there communication as to switching from her to you? And is there any reason why it was switched? Was there conflict involved, or?
Um, no conflict at all. Chairman, as I said, she was GAR for previous 8 disasters, and it, I guess, must have been an assumed role. Um, Early on, when we got our March 13 national declaration, that was almost like a blanket approval for all states and territories, um, and did not require, actually, at the time, the document called the FEMA State Agreement, where the governor would have to assign a person. So she was acting um, in the event she would be assigned to this disaster. When we applied for a major disaster declaration and got our approval on April 1st, it still took about 2 weeks for that FEMA state agreement for the regional administrator, Mr. Bob Fenton, to sign. And in between that time period, I was heavily involved with the task force and the operations, and I guess the governor had decided um, to assign me to this disaster, and I took on the role and the challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. And with that, let me recognize the floor, and then I'll agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Mr. Guerrero. Thank you for coming on today's proceedings. Just a couple of questions on this morning's proceedings. When we were questioning Mr. Guerrero from Homeland Security with regards to the purchase requisition of Asia Pacific Hotels Canoa Resort. I know that he has informed us that they have terminated PIC's contract. But what I wanna ask is, we're still utilizing Canoa as a facility, and this purchase requisition is only good for the month of June, and it seems that you guys are in a negotiation again for an extension. Can you expound on the process now
Sure.
that is taken?
Yeah. Yes, the first contract we had with Canoa was 90 days, and I believe the last date would have been June 21st. Um, it's been 30 days. The AG and I have been working on, well, my end is negotiating with Canoa. On his end is making sure that it's also in the best interest of the Commonwealth. And it's of legal form and fashion, of course, when it comes to contracts. It has taken a while, partly because the facility started off as a 90-day contract for use as a non-congregate shelter, and now we're working on the intricacies of splitting and having actually 2 separate contracts. One to continue renting the facility for some rooms that we'll be needing to house or isolate confirmed cases. And the other part, which FEMA has advised me to have separate contract, is for the rental of the space that we built out for the alternate care facility. So we're splitting the property, and there's some details and negotiations involved in that process. I was hoping today I would get that done, and I forgot that I had to be here. But we hope to get that in the next couple of days.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Guerrero. And if and when a deal is executed with the negotiations now, where is this source of funding that's going to be used to for these extensions? What funding?
Both contracts, whether it's a non-congregate shelter or an alternate care site, are two programs supported by FEMA Public Assistance Program. And so funding would come from that, at least for the federal cost share.
Thank you for that response. You for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Flor. Chair recognizes Representative Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. GAR, thank you for taking the time to meet with us this afternoon. I know I had some questions in regards to your duties in your position, which you have already elaborated to the chair. So thank you for that. I just wanted to see, because part of this still is a little confusing to me. And I know that you're the GAR. Usually when it comes time for certain, usually in regards to certain things with disasters, you're the go-to person. Just like how Ms. Villagomez was the go-to, and Sodalor, and you two. That's how I interpret your position in regards to anything federal that needs to be taken care of. That's what the GAR does. I wanted to kind of get some clarification, because I know sometime earlier this year, about maybe a couple months ago, maybe 3 months ago, there was a I believe a technical assistance grant that came out in regards to funding for COVID from OIA. Another person was put in charge of that grant. I wanted to kind of ask, what was the purpose about that, considering that you are the governor's authorized representative? So I wanted to see if you could clarify that issue.
Thank you, Representative Castro. I believe that funding made available through OIA as a technical assistance grant. Most of the OIA technical assistance grants go through the Office of Grants Management. It's my understanding that Epic Guerrero is expenditure authority, or maybe the governor's expenditure authority, but he acts or administers the funding from that source. It's not a FEMA grant for public assistance or individual assistance, so that does not fall under my purview.
Okay. I think I was the one that I was alluding to was I believe a program that was that had the governor's chief of staff as the point of contact. That's the one I wanted to see your clarification for.
To be quite honest, I'm not aware of who's assigned. Usually when you receive a grant, a federal grant, there would be somebody in charge of the administration of that, and I don't know who that person is for that particular grant. I did read that myself in the news, and I think it was at the time mistaken for the CARES Act funding, and the CARES Act funding of some $30+ million currently, as I understand, is overseen by the Department of Finance. But I don't know if the secretary himself too for that funding is the expenditure authority. But to answer your question, it's not under the governor's authorized representative or any other program that I manage or oversee.
Okay, so all right. In regards to how much information is filtered your way in regards to the purchases that are used with the CARES Act, that also falls under your watch, or is just strictly with the finance department?
Not under my watch.
Okay.
And maybe you can clarify that with Secretary of Finance. But let me add, so not trying to avoid answering any question. I just want to be clear. I don't know about those particular grants, and when I heard at the time, or the name of the chief of staff was mentioned at the time, um, and we mistake him sometimes. We've seen his name maybe as an alternate GAR. I don't even think, for this disaster specifically too, this COVID-19 disaster, um, th- or in any FEMA declared disaster, there is a GAR and an alternate GAR. So for COVID-19, I am the GAR, and Virginia is actually the alternate GAR for COVID-19. It's just it's an assignment. So if I was not available, that other person can be the expenditure authority. And for you two, to my knowledge, it's not even Angel Dupan. It's not even the alternate guard for that. His name may have been thrown in as a consideration, but to my knowledge, he's not an alternate guard for any disaster. He may have been assigned as a GAR or in the event for some smaller events that came through after between U2 and COVID, but those events did not become um, presidentially declared disasters like Hagibis and another, I forget the names already of all the storms we've been through in the last few years. And he may have been his name may have been thrown to be that person, but if there's no major disaster declaration, then that position doesn't really hold any authority. Uh, but if you have any other information, I might be able to answer.
Well, I reason why I asked that. Now that you mentioned that, you did indicate that in regards to this disaster, uh, the previous GAR is your alternate.
Correct.
I'm just inquiring because I know in our records it indicated Mr. Damapan is the alternate GAR for this for this response. So
Well, I can provide this body with the document. If it's not signed by the FEMA regional administrator, is it? Then it was probably a draft. Maybe he was to be assigned.
as far as the documents that we have, it's the signatures that are on that sheet that indicated his role is just himself and the governor.
Yeah, so then that's not the official FEMA state agreement.
So in order for it to be official, it has to come straight from Mr. Fenton. That's what you're saying.
It has to have his signature on one of the pages. So the copy I have signed by Mr. Fenton on April 13. There's an attachment to this agreement that lists down everyone assigned. So it lists myself as the GAR, Virginia Villagomez as the alternate GAR. Should there be a hazard mitigation program available, it's Elizabeth Balaja. Gerald is the state coordinating officer. Um, Joey De La Cruz is his alternate state coordinating officer. And it lists a couple of other people just for that need to be on the FEMA state agreement.
Okay, so safe to say that document that indicates him as your alternate, that was an interim document, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a copy of that.
Okay, Chair, do I still have time or should I yield for more? Okay, Mr. Guerrero, I do have more questions to ask you, but of course, in the interest of the other members, I'll yield at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Castro. Now recognize Rep. Lipa.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Pat.
Yeah.
Pat, what's the status of that parking lot at the CHCC?
I know that work was completed to clear the property, to level it out. They had what do you call it? Steamrolled, put gravel and steamrolled that property, and now they're looking at a funding source to pave it. Um, both the activities completed to clear the property and the paving are not going to qualify under FEMA's public assistance Category B program. So I've sort of not privy to latest developments, but that's as far as I know.
But aren't you signing off for that?
There were some, um, at the time, there were some contracts to procure heavy equipment rental or gravel, and there might have been a few purchase requisitions that I did sign. I think at the end of the day, it will not. As I got clarification a couple of weeks ago, it's not going to be eligible under the PA program. So we are looking for possibly having it funded under the CARES Act funding or more funding that's still available under that $4 million technical assistance grant that EPI received.
So whose decision was it to move forward with the project?
It was certainly a need identified by the task force because if you know, we took a good chunk of the parking lot, and that's where we placed the tents and restroom facilities for the.
I don't understand that, but under whose authority was it that you need to acquire or pursue forward with that parking lot?
Because there was a need for more parking for
I
yeah.
don't understand the need for parking, but under whose?
I believe that property was assigned to CHCC some time ago, and so it's their property, and they could and they decided to do that activity.
So is it being utilized at the moment?
No, but there's some kind of procurement out right now to get quotations or proposals to pave it. Yeah.
Pave it.
Because there's identified funding that potentially funding to pave it. They didn't open it up for use because.
So is it still under review with the AG?
What is still under review? Procurement or the proposal, the bidding?
Because based on the what we gathered here, it's listed on pending legal review by the Attorney General.
I'm not to my knowledge. I don't know what's sitting at the AG's office for review at this time.
You're supposed to know because
that's something Homeland.
It's your name. You're the approving
Right.
authority, and you're supposed to know what's before the AG right now. I mean, how can we account for what have you approved for payment and what's pending? And this is one document that I'm looking at. Roughly $65,000 on that project, just clearance and coral, and the equipment that was utilized. What I understand, some of the equipment belongs to DPW, or I might be wrong, but is there conflicting issue with this project? Because
There are.
you know, it's been 1 month since the execution of this purchase requisition, and it's still pending.
Um, some examples of why a contract or requisition might be pending at the AG's office is the AG, quite honestly, at the end of the day, I consider him a good, very good check and balance and friend of mine because he makes sure that everything is in order, and sometimes it's as simple as the justification letter from Homeland might be, pay $65,000 for heavy equipment rental, and they don't have the supporting documentation that they say in their justification letter, and the AG just holds it and says, before I sign this, I want you to show me.
But isn't it proper to say that before you move with the project, we need to get the AG to approve it first? What would happen if they just completely deny approving this project? who's going to be responsible? Is that CNMI responsibility? Local?
Right. Generally, yes, that's not good practice to go too far into completion of work before you actually get a contract. But it is a situation we do run into every now and then when there's when there's a need to do something. In the interest of time, we engage sometimes in services, but it is the finance section of Homeland's job to make sure that they push through and get that contract, especially before it's completed. In this case, it doesn't sound like, but lesson learned, and again, it's not good practice. If I can add, I know I'm not to take your time, but when I say that, um, I say that, at the time we did it, it might I don't know if that's a month or 2 months ago. We were still under the projections of we're gonna have this many cases. We were trying to put up the MCATs to get that ready. And at the same time, we need the parking. So we're running full speed to get these things done. That sometimes we have to come back and administratively do the paperwork to get the contracts so that we can make payments to these vendors. They deserve to be paid if the work's completed. And in that process, it's again, I say that it's not good practice, but in the
I
interest
think,
of
Pat,
time.
what we need is for you to provide an update on status on this to the committee. Mr. Chairman, I highly recommend that we get a status update on this project and find out where is this project between the AG and GAR. So with that in mind, Pat, I highly recommend that you submit something to the committee on this. Last but not least, this warehouse space rental that we're utilizing for the logistical purpose of staging for and distribution of supply. Is this facility sound? Meaning we do have bad weather. Would this PPE be contained with no implication to bad weather?
I believe so. It got a little damage from YouTube, but they since repaired it. I know because right before we moved in, we had some concerns, and they had replaced all of their roll-up doors. I believe it's
And this facility is contained
yes.
to make sure that there's no mold and all this. Was it properly cleaned out to sustain this PPE equipment, because some of this equipment has to be sterilized?
It's well ventilated, but that's a good point to bring up, and we continue to. I mean, we'll make sure that.
I think, Pat, you need to revisit again. As the GAR, to your task to make sure that all these things are properly taken care of first before moving stuff around, because these are PPE that our frontliner are going to be utilized. I don't want them getting compromised, because the product has mold. We spend an arm and a leg to procure it, and we need to protect this PPE, because I, for one, want our frontliners to be protected, because they're the one that's going to be wearing this. And if this PPE are compromised and they get sick, that's a liability for the CNMI government, and we have to answer to the family of those frontliners. I appreciate if you give us an update status of this, and if, Mr. Chairman, if it's privy, I'd like to see the facility to prove myself wrong that this facility is safe and sound. With
Sure.
that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield my time for you.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on that? Or?
Noted. As an advisor also to Homeland Security, I will bring that up to them. They're in charge of operations, and I will bring that up to them and make sure they follow through. Thank you, Rep. Lipan.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Is there any member that would like You haven't asked yet? Okay, Rep. Sablan, Ms. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Guerrero. Thank you for being here. My first question is, are you involved in the negotiations for all of the contracts related to COVID-19?
Not all.
Which ones are you not involved in?
Usually the go-to guy, I guess, when for the more complex ones, and so I did some of the higher value, higher dollar value ones for sure.
Which ones would those be?
Off the top of my head, the two non-congregate shelters, PIC and Kanoa. Construction for the alternate care site,
That was with Helios.
Helios as well, yes. The engineering for that. The construction and engineering also for the MCATs, for short, we call it at the hospital. And a few others in between. If you have any.
International Royal, were you involved with that?
Not negotiations per se, but yes, in making sure that that contract was, I guess, processed properly, or maybe on most of the supplies. My role also, I stepped in as logistics in bringing the goods over to the CNMI, not so much in the actual contract.
So if you were not involved in the contracts with International Royal, then who was?
No, I did have some communication with International Royal, but it's get the quote. This is if this is the stuff we're gonna need, and then I probably for processing for the actual language of the contract. We do have templates, but every now and then for these complex ones, I'll tweak them to meet both parties' needs and work with the AG's office on doing things like that. But for that particular contract, other than phone calls and maybe some emails communicating on what we're procuring, then I was limited to that and had Homeland Security process it through their normal process.
Through the sole source procurement process.
Honestly, I don't even know if that contract ended up as a sole source contract.
That's what the special assistant said.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So
he said that you would be more familiar with the terms of
yeah.
the International Royal contract and that he was also not directly involved in the negotiations. But you were directly involved in the negotiations?
Phone calls and emails, yes. Yeah.
So who were you dealing with?
I don't know if it's his first. Oh, I guess his last name is Royal. His first name is Bick, but you switch it around, and that's the name of the company, I guess. Bick Royal.
Big Salty?
Or C. Yeah, maybe.
Bick
If I look at my email, probably that's his last name that shows up. Sorry.
So for this sole source contract, why did you go to a uniform company on Guam for PPEs?
Well, it could have been anyone really. My understanding is it was a middleman. It was someone connecting us to other companies that supplied it or manufactured it. I don't know if he went to other suppliers or straight to manufacturers. But our challenges in the very beginning, and even the challenges, I guess, of some or all, I never had direct communication with any of the others on island. But it's my understanding that they were having trouble themselves in getting either direct from a manufacturer or finding a supplier for some of those products we purchased. Here we had someone that was essentially, I mean, in the form of a contract, promising to deliver certain quantities of goods in a certain amount of time. And during the emergency, that was sometimes we took time over cost, of course, within reasonable cost, but when the whole world was competing for the same commodity, And maybe as a middleman, it was going through 5 different other suppliers to get to the manufacturer, but somehow they got it done. They delivered on most of the products that we asked for. And for those products that they did not deliver, we canceled out of the contract because we had a time frame as well. Uh, that
So just so we're clear,
Yeah.
did the government approach International Royal, or did International Royal approach the government in the first place?
By the time I had started communications with BIC, um, it was there was already quotations for these products, and I was more involved, like I said, with logistics and getting and finding out. Okay, you're gonna supply us this many N95 masks, this many surgical masks. Where am I gonna go pick it up, and when? Was the extent really of my involvement in getting those
So who directed you
resources
then
here.
to deal with Bixopti for
Um,
PPEs?
these these quotations were provided by the task force and Homeland Security. Yeah,
Who at the task force? I'm sorry.
Mr. Warren Villagomez.
Okay. And what about for MedFarm? Were you involved in the negotiation for that contract?
That one again, similar. There was no negotiation uh, of pricing. Usually, I guess when I think of the term negotiation, it's pricing, but more on the delivery, quantity and delivery of the goods. MedFarm is a known vendor on the island. I guess maybe their corporate offices in Guam. And same thing, I had seen quotes and proposals to provide these products, and the extent then again of my involvement was to ensure that we got those on island in the amount of time. Yeah,
So
that
who
was
from MedFarm
that
were you
we.
communicating with then?
Um, from the beginning, I actually was working. I think a few MedFarm contracts that are already gone through, and the person that I got in touch with was from Guam. His name is Rene Ramos.
Rene Ramos.
I
And,
believe.
and was this another case of the COVID-19 task force chairman providing you with quotes and giving you the direction to go to these companies for
For
for a deal?
MedFarm, it was not just the task force, but also CHCC. Um, they're a known vendor for CHCC.
So, speaking of CHCC, we understand that a number of ventilators and dialysis units were procured through MedFarm that turned out to not be FDA approved in the case of the ventilators, and not a compatible brand that CHCC typically uses in the case of the dialysis units. Could you explain or shed some light on how that happened, and why wasn't CHCC consulted about the types of units that they would need?
Actually, contrary to what information you might have for that statement, these were all reviewed and found to be acceptable by CHCC. Uh, Ventilators and hemos, 2 different machines, obviously. Ventilators, these that we got, I remember seeing during that time documents that they received either. I don't want to talk too technical in terms of the medical field, but either the term emergency user agreement under FEMA's waiver during emergencies, or even waivers from HHS that allowed for the use of non-FDA ventilators. We were offered, I just want to add to that, not take away your time, but some of these questions are not simple yes or no, but require some context. At the time, um, as have in my written testimony, by the time goods that were promised to us by our federal partners, by the time they got out here, it was half, if that, of what they offered us. And the same with the ventilators. There was at one point where we were expecting over 100 ventilators from the strategic national stockpile. What we ended up getting at the day was 25 little portable ventilators that came in suitcases. And so we were using, again, following FEMA, John Hopkins University models for the number of cases that was projected to hit us here. We needed, I think, at the highest point, over 200 ventilators. And so we went out, and whoever said they got it, and we passed it on through Dr. Tadella, John Tadella, to say, are these, can we work with these? We took we went out on a limb and said, we'll get these, and we'd rather have these than none at all. And so those were, and I was present earlier during Gerald Guerrero's questioning. Um, we ordered 30 on our first order, so I wanted to add to some of the answers that he tried to give. We ordered 30 and then 50 in two separate orders. To date, we've only received 45 ventilators, and we canceled the rest because, again, they promised us they would get it to us in 30 days, but even they had a hard time fulfilling their side of the contract, so we canceled.
So you're saying that even the FDA, the non-FDA approved ventilators were reviewed, approved by CHCC, and they have said that they can use them?
Yes,
And who from CHCC, Dr. Tadella,
correct.
confirmed that?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the hemodialysis machines, um, these are these were also reviewed and approved, and I think we got a total of 15 from Pacific Biomed, PBSI, I think the acronym of their company. They are the ones that currently service and maintain the hemodialysis machines at CHCC. And so I wasn't aware they're not of the same brand. I heard earlier something to that nature, but nonetheless, it's one that we can work with. We need a hemodialysis machine. It didn't matter what brand it was. It was approved by Dr. Tadella as well, or someone at the hemo unit.
Okay. And then going back to Mariana's Resort, so at our last hearing with you, I guess a couple months ago now, you had indicated that the Mariana's Resort had many issues, was not a suitable place for quarantine. There was a problem with ADA compliance, there were issues with the HVAC system, and you also said that the government didn't want to be in the business of running a hotel. So what has changed? And why are we using government funds, even federal funds, to overhaul the Marianas Resort when Kanoa Resort is also available as a non-congregate shelter and is not full?
I guess we learned along the way, and in the last couple of months, maybe we can pull through and actually run that resort. But still, I did advise Homeland that there's still the operations that I don't feel like we can do. Our team here can operate. So in order to run the Marianas Resort, we're still actually looking at executing a management contract to run some of the operations. But as far as putting the facility up and getting back up to running, I guess we identified we don't need much more than what we put in the first couple of months to get it ready. And with a few additional air conditioning units and the fire sprinkler system was one big thing that I never thought we could get up to code or to pass fire inspection. That has since been done. And it looks like at the end of the day, I don't have numbers to share with you, but I've done the math over and over in my head. And we would be saving significant costs if we ran that facility. Um, it was not ADA back to, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
go
just to interrupt you real quick. Saving compared to what?
Compared to the current or past contracts that we
With
had for
PIC.
non-congregate shelter, correct?
And, but you don't know exactly how much we'd be saving?
Um, don't hold me to
Roughly?
this number, but I think we're gonna save 75%.
75%
Yeah,
of
if it was
$11
$100 a
million?
night, now it's $25 a night. I'm just for
Even including the management contract and the cost of
Yes.
construction and renovation?
yes.
Interesting. Who is the contractor for construction?
There was not a lot of construction to do. It was just simple repairs. Fix a few doors here, fix some plumbing, put in some new air conditioning units.
Okay. And then last question for this round. With the Kanoa contract, so when we visited back in May, we were told that the facility would be ready to open. It was 75 to 90% done. And within 2 weeks from that visit. So what is going on? What is the reason for the delay in completion?
Um, I'll give you an example, and it's not that um, it's not that we went too far outside our I guess our timeline to get it done, but as we flatten the curve here, allowed us to um, further address and build into the facility other features that we were leaving out in the interest of time, because at the time we were pushing for 45 days construction, because at the time they were telling us you're going to need all of this ready by this date. You're going to have 5,000 cases and this many hospitalizations. So we pushed as hard as we could, and if we needed it at that time, I'm sure we would have made something worse, something rather than leaving people in beds outside the overhang of a building or in the hallway of the hospital. We would have done something that we wouldn't have had back then.
So
Now that
sorry,
we have more
additional
time.
features such as what?
For example, the very early design was we were going to use ventilators in the facility, and early on we said the quickest way to do this was to just use gas cylinders, bring in tanks and connect them to the ventilators, and they would be then taken back to CHCC for refill of air as the tanks emptied out. Now with more time, we're looking at purchasing oxygen producing machines and running lines so that those lines can actually be available at the bedside now, and not have to worry about running out of air and having to run back and forth between CHCC and Kanoa. In the process of installing the hemodialysis machines, we're now able also to do additional plumbing so that we can make sure that each machine there has adequate RO water to each unit, things like that. And we have more time now, and we're using that time. Thankfully, we do have the time to do it, and all of this supported again by FEMA and HHS through the toolkit that we follow.
Uh-huh. So does that mean that with all this time and additional features, that there is also additional costs then that we would be incurring?
Sure. Yeah.
Can we afford that?
Through the program, we're doing our best to make every cost an eligible cost under the program.
But the contract that you're negotiating, the original contract with Kanoa, it was about 14 million. So we're looking at something in excess of that then, with all these additional features that are being built in.
No,
To the
actually,
facility.
no. We put in our own money, or through FEMA, where we built out the facility, and that will be funded under a project, a FEMA project. We're only talking about, when we say a contract with Kanoa, is Kanoa was not doing any of the build out themselves. They were just giving us the facility to to use. So we're just paying a lease rent. And actually, I've been able to, we don't have a signed contract yet, but I'm looking forward to, through negotiations, that we actually reducing now the cost at the end of the day for both the alternate care site and non-congregate shelter of Kanoa.
Thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. For the first round, any member? Before I recognize Representative Probst. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat, did I hear you correct that you cancel some of this ventilator order?
Yes, correct.
Which one is that? Because there's one that was an emergency procurement purchase of 30 unit at 36,000, which I think this was Virginia Villagomez that signed off on this.
Yeah, but I'm aware of that because we flew in what was available. Out of that 30, we received 25, and so we're going to cancel the other 5 on that contract, or we already have notified them.
So 5 is canceled out of the 30.
Hmm. Yes.
And then what is the difference between that ventilator and the one that were the 50 unit?
And then on the 50 units, we've only received 20. That's why we have I mentioned earlier, a total of 45. So we canceled 30 units. They're different units. They come from different manufacturers. Again.
But you mentioned that they're portable. Are they the same portable?
Yes, correct. Yeah. But these are portable, meaning they're on wheels. As opposed to what I explained earlier from the national stockpile, came in some sort of a suitcase. These are portable because you can move them around. They're not mounted.
But when you compare the two, are they not identical or?
They're different units and hence different costs per unit.
So different unit.
Yeah.
So the one that's for the ACS is
All of them are down at the ACS right now.
step higher in the unit, the 25 you mentioned, or 20?
The 25 and the 20, all 45 are at Kanoa right now. They'll be used down there.
So the 20 are more upscale ventilator?
I don't have the contract in front of me, but
Because I'm trying to.
I know there's a price difference, right?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
talking about 3.6 in price differential. So I'm just kind of wondering whether it's the same unit.
Different, both different units. I mean,
So
they're different units. 2 types.
Medfarm did not escalate the pricing, right?
No.
That's what everyone was saying, that the pricing was kind of escalated.
No, they're not the same units. I think one's called a Superstar, and and the other one a different model. You're welcome to see that one down there too. That they're different models.
I'll hear for this one, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Lee. I believe Rep. Castro just stepped out. He had a question. So I'll recognize Representative Probst.
Thank you, Chairman and colleagues. And thank you, GAR, for coming in today. Appreciate your time, as we did for the Special Assistant for Homeland Security, Gerald De Leon Guerrero. We know you guys have a lot to do, and we appreciate, again, your time and commitment here in answering some of our questions. I do want to say this before I do ask you some questions, that we've heard many times that this pandemic is like nothing we've ever seen or experienced, and we can all feel that, most especially you and others. And before this, we said something similar, that U2 was like nothing we've ever seen or experienced, that with the strength of the typhoon and the super typhoon and the devastation. And so right now we are obviously, our economy is in tatters. There's a lot of businesses struggling. It is a bleak economy until we get back on our feet, until we see tourism revived and everything else, and that we can actually move on with our lives. We have to get past this pandemic. But in the meantime, we're stuck with it, right? So one of the things that in this economy is to basically try to help out as much as we possibly can, this administration and the legislature, in helping businesses, local businesses, especially the small businesses, the backbone of every economy. And that is why you were here earlier this morning when we did ask some questions. I know you're familiar with the questions that we were asking about the trouble that we saw where we weren't seeing local companies getting opportunities as some other businesses have. And whether it was intentional or not, we did receive complaints. I'm sure every one of us has received complaints. And it is our responsibility to our constituents to voice these concerns, because aside from a pandemic, we are also in a climate of fear where if you do speak out, you could possibly lose your job or lose contracts with your business. That's not just with this administration. This has been in past administrations, and it's nothing new. But we do accept the fact that nothing is perfect. Mistakes have been made, because nobody is perfect. But some of the things that we see are troubling. And I say this because of the things that I have reviewed and other members have reviewed. I just want to give you just a small glimpse of this. These two binders right here are only a part of the contracts that one company received during this pandemic. It's not even complete. This is probably about $70,000, around that worth of contracts. It's a fairly new company. Now, while this company should be supported, we have companies that have been in business for decades that were promised a contract through email, verbal, as you heard this morning, and then given nothing. Investing in acquiring equipment, if anybody's a small business, especially in the struggling economy, is difficult financially. But a person that loses her job, her source of income, is furloughed, still hasn't received PUA, is hoping to use her business to try to make some money, does not have that opportunity to do so, when this company or other companies should have been given it. Because it was explained to us that this was going to be spread around, right, a couple of weeks for this company and then kind of rotate the companies. But we found that certain companies were getting clearly a better deal than others. And then when I was told that, well, there was no complaints about the company or the business, okay. But that doesn't mean that there are other businesses that can't do the same or have the same opportunity. So that is something that is obviously a concern with regard to that. I do want to say that as we move forward, it's important that we address this now, because after U2, after everything after U2, we went through it and we learned things along the way. We don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. Is that correct?
Correct.
So this is why we are hoping to have these type of conversations, get information, and provide feedback from our constituents so that the administration can make better decisions or perhaps learn from mistakes that have been made, intentionally or not. I think that's where we have to move past this division when it comes to this. But I can assure you that based on what we see, and you've seen this with some of these contracts, that there were things that were egregious or very concerning. And the vendors that I talked to previously, one of the biggest questions they had was the one from Royal Bigs, just because the way that it was written out in their quotes. And some of the items that could easily be provided locally, there were vendors that were never afforded that opportunity. So I've already asked the questions this morning, and I feel I've gotten the answers for the most part. But what I'm hoping from this point moving forward is that these local vendors are prioritized over off-island vendors, whether they're Guam or foreign, especially if these local vendors can, do have the supplies and the ability to provide these services. Is that something that makes sense? Is that something that would work?
I can't disagree with that. There's certainly, we don't want to keep repeating that we've learned a lesson this time around and only to repeat it again the next time. But on that note is we and maybe thankful to this body then, because it does provide that we air out those concerns and have a check and balance. This is not the last disaster too. It's very different, but it's not the last. Probably not the last pandemic as well that we'll ever go through in our lives. It seems their storms are getting more frequent, and maybe pandemics will too. And not to make excuses, but even in outside of the response period of when a disaster does occur, my office, the Public Assistance Office, is a recovery office, and we look at long-term recovery. We look at building plans for what we can do in the future to better our processes and procedures, things like that. And I tell you, I've been around since Sodalor, at least in this line of work here. And we were getting ready to launch and pull teams together to say what can we do to prepare for the next, because we learned so much from Sodalor. And then we got hit by Mankut, and we were all jumping in the air like, hey, a nice small event for us to refine our process, get a list going of vendors for all different services, all different products, so we have it on hand. FEMA and the federal government uses that same tool, getting contracts in advance of an event. So when the event hits, we don't need to be scrambling where to go, where to get something as simple as meals. We would have already a pre-approved vendor list that could provide services. And then you two hit us, and we got stuck in that for a couple of years, and here we are again. We probably need to stop planning to do that planning in a non-event year and just put a team together even during this disaster. And I've brought that up also to the Homeland Security to say, get ready, because we could have a typhoon next month, and we don't want to do the same things over and over again. So well noted. And I'd like to point out that we did run, like Gerald said, 150 miles an hour, maybe some of us even faster. And we made decisions on the spot, but now we're at a stage where for all our needs right now, we're really looking out and looking back also at many of our on-island vendors to provide services or products. And if we sit here 30, 60 days from now and that doesn't ring true in the documents that you see, I'll be more than responsible to take your concerns on that.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. Let me just ask one question. Mr. Guerrero, you submitted to this body or to me via email the first reimbursement. That correct? That was
Yes.
the one you sent this morning?
Yes.
We noticed only under labor for all the departments, you only listed DPS, DOC, and DFEMS. Is there a reason why the other departments were not included with regards to getting reimbursed? I understand Department of Finance has been paying other programs. Is there a reason why it wasn't included in your first round of reimbursements?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Great question. Um, Usually when I throw numbers on a page, I kind of cringe because depending on how you read it, you could come up with all kinds of scenarios. So to provide information, I guess now during our time here, during our discussion, what you see, I think I gave you 4 pages of a summary. Um, and it includes government agencies like you mentioned, DFEMS, Department of Corrections, DPS, Commonwealth Healthcare Corporation, CPA, and even CUC. All other agencies are claiming reimbursement for their time. We're on the subject of labor here under the Homeland Security uh, application. Um,
CARES Act?
no,
Or no,
no, under FEMA.
under FEMA?
Yeah, well, I don't know if there might be some employees paid directly under the CARES Act, uh, but Homeland Security in a disaster response, what they do is they pull resources, human resource personnel from different government agencies. Um, those agencies can apply for public assistance funds directly, like DFEMS, DOC, and DPS, and the few other autonomous agencies are doing. Or they can just put in the request through Homeland Security. They get funded under the disaster operations, and then because at the end of the day, a lot of those other central government agencies, anyways, when it comes back, it just comes back to the general fund. It won't necessarily go to their department or agency.
So it doesn't mean that it will not be approved for reimbursement. Is that why it was left out, or?
Right now, as it stands, there's my office estimates about well, not estimates. We go into the JDE financial system. Um, Under Homeland Operations, 1.7 million in force account labor has been paid out, and but we've only submitted $173,000 so far, pending documents and reports, most likely.
And that's proof that work was actually done, or is it what kind of documents?
It's work being, yeah, so all of their documents would, all of their timesheets, time cards, where they were assigned to work, where they were at the quarantine or at the airport testing would be filed with Homeland Security.
So for the record, CARES Act is totally separate from FEMA reimbursement.
Correct,
And
that's
FEMA
correct.
doesn't reimburse labor, or if it's not directly involved in.
Well, the big thing with FEMA and most other federal grants is avoiding a duplication of benefits. If someone's getting paid by a federal program, uh, then chances are FEMA won't reimburse that uh, federal program.
So are you saying that we are currently duplicating work that FEMA will not?
No, no, because at the end of the day, you just have to ensure that what you submit to FEMA for a reimbursement is not also being claimed through another federal government agency. So if there's any um, labor being paid currently by the CARES Act, then we would not claim that from FEMA because we would be double dipping. We would be
And yeah.
duplicating benefits.
So we did get a report out of the department. Maybe the Secretary of Finance can clarify this tomorrow. Uh, and a lot of the personnel that were being paid is under a federal grant. It doesn't specify what federal grant. A lot of the rest of the staff or frontline workers were paid for out of the general account first, but there's a few that are under federal grants. Is that what you're referring to as duplication of?
So, for your knowledge, too, in a disaster, when there's doesn't even have to be a major disaster declaration. When there's an event type, let's use a typhoon for example, and the governor issues a state of emergency for the CNMI, a business unit, an account is created for that operations, and whether it's personnel costs, salaries and wages and whatnot, or cost of supplies and operations, everything comes out of that account. And then when we submit to FEMA for reimbursement, most 99% of it is funds that were expended under that account. So that tells us too that it's not a federal fund account. It was strictly a disaster account created for the event. If we don't claim it with FEMA, then it's claimed by another federal agency. There's ways to track that and ensure that we're not duplicating benefits.
Okay. Well, under the CARES Act, I believe there was a memo sent out for release under the CARES Act, where the Department of Finance states that $11 million for procurement of COVID tests, 6.4. You've seen that document, right? Where they were spending the $36 million under CARES Act.
Oh, okay.
So the
I think
government,
you saw. I think at the time that was how do you say, like at the time we had just received $36 million or somewhere around that number,
right?
and I believe that was a sort of a projected budget.
Expenditure plan.
Yeah, expenditure plan. What actuals at the end of the day, I don't know because I don't see reports
Because
for that funding.
I noticed where some of the items that were under COVID, you're claiming it under FEMA as well.
Right.
How does that work?
Right. So one is, again, I haven't seen an expenditure report for that funding, but when the process with the FEMA Public Assistance is we submit these costs, whether it's contracts, timesheets for labor and whatnot, and we get a project worksheet awarded to us. Then we get funds awarded. Before we draw down funds, we have to ensure that one, it's not been paid out by another federal
I
program,
understand.
and at the end of the day, we can deobligate funds too if we never end up using them.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm trying to get clarification. We have a CARES Act funding plan, but then we're reimbursing for it. So I'll clarify maybe with the secretary tomorrow.
Yeah, I think he'll be able to answer that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Guerrero. For the second round, is there any Rep. Castro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I know for a little bit of the first round I was indisposed, so in case I might ask something to you, GAR, that might sound a little redundant. Feel free to clarify. I know that in your position you don't really you try your. I don't really think you try too much to micromanage, but just I hope I'm phrasing that correctly. But I gotta ask, in regards to how things are procured, how involved are you in the process? Because I know you mentioned in the first round some of the contracts that were signed. Obviously some were signed by the previous GAR, but then I think were there others after you took the helm that you weren't directly involved in? I mean, other than what was specified during the first round.
Thank you, Rep. Castro. I think to date there's almost about 500 contracts or PRs either executed or in process. I can't say how many I work with, but I do not. You're right. I don't want to get involved in every single one of them, and I certainly offer assistance to the Homeland Security for some of the more complex ones.
Okay. Now, I know we asked this when the Special Assistant for Homeland Security was here, and I'm kind of recycling a little bit of the questions we asked in the case of us
Sure.
questioning you now. Now, I know during times of disaster, sometimes the regular procurement process is circumvented. I did ask the question of is if the request of 3 quotes a normal part of the ICS process during this response, and of course you're a very big role in the incident command system. So I need to ask, going forward, since you've been in this position, have you been kind of sticking to that, or it goes on a supply and demand basis with you trying to procure resources?
Yeah, during a disaster and state of emergency, the normal procurement process, we don't necessarily set it aside, but it doesn't work in our favor when we need an immediate good or service. But wherever possible, we try to mimic the process and the regular procurement regulations, and probably leave out things like the time, the minimum amount of time required. I've done a couple of bids that sort of follow that process, and probably the only things I eliminate is not having to wait 14 days, which is the minimum amount of time, and certainly there's a lot of things that we can't wait 30 days to procure an item or service. But the streamlined procurement process does allow for a more shortened time, because a lot of these things during a disaster response are time sensitive. And I want to point out that it's something that's practiced too at the national level. Particularly though for this event, they made sure that they advised us of what we're allowed to do. And I'm very familiar with the 2 CFR 200, which is the Code of Federal Regulations for Procurement. Our procurement regulations here are more strict because of our minimum threshold amounts, but at the same time, we do look to that for guidance. And one of the first, probably in just a few days after that March 13 National Public Health Emergency Declaration, I received a document, and I can share this with you all if you want. It's just a couple of pages. Procurement under grants conducted under exigent or emergency circumstances. This probably is more lenient than our streamlined process. And it says that, if I may, non-state entity must follow procurement requirements. However, federal regulations allow for non-competitive procurements under certain circumstances, including when an entity determines that immediate actions required to address the public exigency or emergency cannot be delayed by competitive solicitation. It goes on to say that there's no time limit on when you would do this, because for certain events it might be a couple of days where you're just in an emergency procurement. It might be a couple of weeks, couple of months or more, and it all depends. And I think we recognized during this pandemic response, we needed to move a lot of contracts under this, I guess, so to say, leeway in the first 60 to 90 days for sure, and after that, as we had more time to do more competitive solicitation, we tried our best to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question I'd like to ask is in regards to these, in regards to some of these vendors that have been either paid off or canceled. You know, the question that everybody's been asking here is, why pay this vendor when they're kind of not in the business of what you're contracting them out for? I'm looking right now at a at a purchase requisition that was canceled, due to not providing a detailed unit cost. And I'm looking at the vendor and I'm looking at at what they're requiring. I believe this is a real estate firm selling medical supplies. In regards to certain purchase requisitions like this, do you like I know emergencies don't really give you that much time to scrutinize, but how do you determine who gets this and who do you contract for this and who do you contract for that?
Um, that's a good question for a trained ops person in procurement at the Homeland Security for sure. It's I mean, certainly when you do, especially when you're doing business with the government, you don't you look for ones that have good track record or have done the type of business. But at the same time, as long as there's no it's not illegal for that company to sell anything. If he has it and you need it, you could justify the procurement of that good because it's available at the time. Um, I don't know what else to say to that.
I'm trying to I'm trying to wrap my mind around that a little bit, Mr. Guerrero. I mean, just because of, I know that when it comes time for stuff like this, certain things are of a necessity, but just sometimes the name on the sheet doesn't match what they're trying to sell you. So I'm that's what I'm trying to allude to in regards to whether your position, if there's a little bit of review or scrutiny when it comes time to this. I mean, there's a lot of names on the there's a lot of names in regards to contracts put out to certain vendors. I mean, that have raised alarms. One in regards to what type of supplies they provide. To two, why are they selling this when they're not in the business of that? And there's other names on this sheet where sometimes certain vendors are given more consideration over the other. So I mean that's what I was trying to get at, because in regards to when it comes to stuff like this, that's what our community and us as the committee are trying to get to. Just some those answers. Last question though. In regards to how you come up with these, in regards to how you, sorry, in regards to how these vendors are selected, you're given ample time in your position to see which is the better one to go to. There's no there's nothing outside of your job that influences you or anybody that's involved with these procurement rigs and issuing out these contracts.
I'm not quite sure what the question is. If you have a direct question on any of the vendors, I'll be happy to answer. Please. Thank you.
Primarily what I was trying to ask is in regards to, the vendors that you deal with, that was done through a fair process of reviewing and vetting, right? There was no there was pretty much there's no preferential selection. Something to that degree. That's what I was trying to ask.
Um, Preferential selection is usually made on the basis of the product or service that they're providing, not on who is the principal owner of the company or anything. But again, if you have a more direct question, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, with now like because I noticed, excuse me, it's same issues with the math sometimes when it comes time to reading it up. But anyways, because I look at certain contracts over here, and I know that my colleagues in this committee have mentioned them to you in the last round. And I look at one particular vendor over here where they pop up about in almost every page, and that vendor has been questioned on whether it's a preference in selecting that company to provide services primarily because of who's involved with it over someone who has who's been around for a while, has the facilities and the and the faculties to perform the same task that that company is undertaking for this response. But it seems as if in some of those cases there's that preference of just sticking to that one vendor. As I was trying to allude to that, do you bid out, or is it just that's what we're going with? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Is that a question, colleague, to
Yeah, that's a question.
response?
Well, again, as I mentioned, we make preference to the whether the company can perform or provide the service. All due respect, if you want to mention the name of the vendor, I'd be more than happy to. to
That's Legends Barbecue.
Okay.
Gar.
Yes, I guess hot topic even since our first meeting, and I understand I'm under oath, and I have no knowledge of who owns this company. I see the name on the PRs that says either just Legends Barbecue, because I think it sounds to me like a sole proprietor license. It says Kent Callan DBA Legends Barbecue, or sometimes it just says Legends Barbecue. And I know there's questions on his association with not a cabinet member, but members of or a member of the administration. But to my knowledge, I don't know who owns this company, other than there's obvious name on it, and I would assume that he's one. He could be one of a few, or he could be the only one. I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't answer anything other than that, unless you have other follow-up questions for it.
If we have another round, I believe Vice Chair acting as Chairman Pro Tem. If there's another round, there's a few more questions I'd like to ask, but for the sake of the other members, I yield.
Thank you, Chairman LJ. I recognize Representative Lipan.
Thank you, Vice. Pat, I just wanted to clarify on this N95 mask. One is dated April 4th and the other one is dated April 25th. On the 4th, this is the justification is for EOC, CHCC, and Canoa Resort. On the 25th, it says on behalf of the CNMI Medical Referral Office in Guam. I'm trying to cross-reference the costs on this. The one on the 4th for 54, I guess the unit says each, it's $78. The 25th for 500 each at $7.64. I'm trying to allude what is the difference between this N95 mask and the 25th N95. Can you illustrate the disparity on pricing here?
Yeah, thank you. apologize, Rep. Guerrero. Um, if I can get a copy of that so I could look at, or if you can please repeat just one more time the cost of the product.
This purchase requisition was issued out on April 4th, and this is for 54, and according to the unit, they based it on each at $78.
Okay,
This is for, based on the justification for quarantine site, EOC, CHCC, and Canoa Resort. And then the purchase requisition on April 25th for 500 each at $7.64 per unit cost, N95 mask, on behalf of the CNMI Medical Referral Office in Guam is the justification. I'm trying to figure out which is the correct amount. I mean, for Saipan, it costs this $78 per piece, but for Guam, it's only $7.64.
and is that for the same vendor?
Yeah, it's a Royal Bix.
Um, yeah, I don't have any other document in front of me to see, but if I'm
And
if it's
both of this have your name on it to concur. And
right, so if it sounds like 54 each at $78, then I would imagine $78 divided by 54 would come out with a
$4,212.
$78 for 54 pieces, it sounds like, on that
Yeah.
one.
And it came out to $4,212. And the one that was dated April 25th, 500 p. Well, if I'm looking at the unit here, it says each, so $7.64. It costs $3,820 for N95 mask, and they're all the same.
Yeah.
N95 mask description. I'm trying to.
I really would like to see the copies on hand to see if there's any other documents behind it that would give me more information. But I do. We have experience not just with this one vendor, but but also with the processing of PRs that they're not always accurate on the units. I know it's got my signature on it, so I should be more careful to look at it when I sign it. But in the
And that's why it's important if this documents that were retained and provided, they should have provided us the supporting documents to justify, because we're just basing it on purchase requisition. And
right.
to be fair to you, because your name is on this, I don't know how to quantify what number is to follow, because
Right, and I thank you for saying that, because at the same time, that's why I said if I had it in front of me, I could see. What I and I'm not prior to this pandemic, quite honestly, I didn't know there's all these numbers in different N95, and I've seen KN95 too coming out of China or Korea. But what I have learned is even in the N95 mass business, you could get one that's U.S. made and has gone through testing to say it would block off a certain percent of air particles, and so it was a real fit N95 mask that had two bands where they actually go around your head and around your neck. That's true N95 masks, and you see certain brands pop up for like 3M, a known company manufactured in the U.S., and then you have N95 masks come out direct from manufacturers out of Asia that don't have those features, but claim to have the same, I guess, how do you say, protection different sources from different markets, and again, this was not it's not a direct purchase from the manufacturer, so there's difference in pricing. And at that time, maybe the decision was nobody else has an N95, and this person has it, and it's of this quality. And what I normally see when I sign is not just that front page. We see the whole contract.
You know,
We see an attachment to it, and
and that's why, Pat, it's
yeah.
very important that we figure out, because I'm being misled here. You know, they're providing finance, providing us this purchase requisition, and it does not give me a direct answer. What I'm alluding to is the cost, and what bothers me is this Royal Bics on smaller amount. The vendor name is Royal Bics. When it's in a bigger amount, such as one that was purchased one lot, it says International Royal Incorporated. I don't understand. They're playing games with us, and then there's one for another purchase requisition and says International Royal Incorporated, DBA Royal Bics, for all this PPE. I mean, do we have a consistency to tell this supplier, you either tell us what the invoice or the vendor name, so we can be consistent, not to throw us off, that on large amount, bill it to International Royal, but on a smaller amount, bill it to Royal Bics. But for a medium amount, International Royal, DBA Royal Bics. You just don't illustrate that this company is legit to me. They're not legit because they're jumping all over with their business name. I mean, how in the heck do you continue to sign off on this and not review it thoroughly? I think, Mr. Chairman, I kind of need to know, find out where's this invoice relatively to this purchase requisition to make my justification whether what is the actual cost for this N95. If it's only saying N95 mask and the other one is saying N95 mask. I'm very concerned with such procurement practice by this company. You know, I did my Google on International Royal, and they're into motor vehicles and equipment, and they're selling PPEs. I don't know, but I would highly recommend that you go back to the drawing board and look at this, and maybe another day we can have you back to explain to us your finding. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield my final time with you.
Thank you, Rep. Lee. Before I recognize Rep. Sablawan, I believe we asked Homeland Security, Mr. Gerald, this question with regards to Medfarm. We noticed a couple of the contract were not reviewed by the legal counsel, and that was signed by you and I believe Miss Virginia on a different occasion. Would this contract be scrutinized by the AG after the fact? Because I believe we already remit some funds to pay. What happens to this, that funds were already remitted to Guam, but it wasn't reviewed by the legal counsel or the AG. I know the AG signed it, but it appeared to be like a I'm not sure,
Yep.
but it wasn't reviewed by the
Okay.
legal aspect of it.
The normal process, and this was actually a new, I don't want to say feature, but a new lines added this during this disaster response at the bottom of every page for the uh, assistant AG to sign that they reviewed, because when we first met on or around March 15 or 16, I forget, the Monday after the declaration was made. It was actually my suggestion to Casley Turner, Assistant AG at the time, that contracts for consistency, we wanted to make sure that every page was not, although it's a template, and most past the first or second page and the last signature page is not really touched, that she still kind of look through it and see that every page was still in order and nothing was changed to benefit any party. And I actually suggested that we add that in there. Now, that was extra guidance also for Homeland to show that before they sent a contract up to the AG, that they had somebody within the Attorney General's office take a look at that contract. Um, and my understanding, I even had one contract that I took up to the AG at the time. It was one contract that I was negotiating and said, could you take a look at this and sign it? I worked with, and at the time it was Casley. I worked with Casley, the assistant AG. We've been going back and forth. And then he took the document and he signed it, and I said, okay, I'll go catch Casley somewhere and have her sign her name at the bottom now of every page that she reviewed it. And he goes, I'm the assistant. I am the Attorney General, and when I sign a document, it means I've looked at every page of it. That was just an extra added measure. It's not required that each page at the bottom be signed. The important page is the signature page, and if it has the AG's page, then he's reviewed the contract and he's satisfied with it.
So this will be in no way of having the
No, those will be
FEMA
fine.
reject the.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and that, just to add, if I may, that contract template was something we refined during U2. It's prior to that, I think when you reach page 6 or 7, it starts all the federal clauses. Prior to that, we didn't even have all those all that language in there. So this is a document that FEMA appreciates that we've done and added all of those clauses.
And lastly, on the first submittal, when would we get the answer to if
For-
those will be approved or not?
For funding?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, um, I guess to summarize, at least for Homeland Security, we know that there's roughly around $64 million of PRs, contracts, POs, that are entered into the system. 51 point, close to 51.8 million of that has been submitted to the Public Assistance Office, and 48.3 has been submitted to FEMA. I actually, just the way I have it summarized on that report for Homeland, emergency operations, medical supplies and test kits, non-congregate shelter, and then the alternate care site. Those likely are 4 separate projects. FEMA calls project worksheets, and will be funded. I won't bet a dollar that they're all funded in the same day, but we look for funding for at least a couple of these in the next week or 2 at the most, and the other 2 to follow shortly after that. So when we say submit it to FEMA, it doesn't mean these are 100% in order and ready for funding. They have their own process. They look through all the documentation. They might come back with questions and say, hey, this contract, or what is this for? Things like that. We go back and forth, and then hoping it gets awarded at some point.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. And just so for the record, any respond that whether these items were approved or not, please provide or inform this body of what's going on, and we would appreciate it.
I'd be more than happy to.
Rep. Sablan, so this is the last no? Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the questions that the members posed earlier, what does a real estate company have to do with PPEs? What does a uniform company, for that matter, have to do with PPEs? These are legitimate questions, as you acknowledged, but you said that these would be questions for a trained ops person who specializes in procurement. So who would that be at Homeland Security?
I think what I meant at the time, excuse me, not quite understanding Rep. Castro's question, but I thought he was, or I assume he was asking, how do you go about it, choosing who you get from product or service? And it's usually the first request comes through the ops, or maybe I should have said logs, because then it goes to logistics and they need to find a source for it. And like I said, I mean, it would be good practice if we had a lot of these pre-identified even before a disaster.
Right, but I'm asking specifically for your logistics or your ops people who go out and get quotes. How would they know to go to a real estate company for PPEs or to a uniform company?
Right.
In these examples.
Yeah, actually, I mean, there's storm chasers out there. Yeah, I mean, if you ever heard of, I mean, when you think of storm chasers, you think of the ones that go around and take videos of tornadoes or what. It's a hobby, but we call storm chasers during disasters too. Is when they know a storm's coming and they have a product or service, they're at your front door the next day, or quite frankly, sometimes they're there before the storm hits. I'll give you an example. Back in U2, they saw that a big storm was coming here, and even the day before the storm hit, they had already contacted me for providing services to put up power posts. In the event power pole was going to fall down, they were ready to provide a service.
So in this case, in COVID-19,
yeah.
Was International Royal a storm chaser? Was MedFarm a storm chaser? Did they approach the government first for contracts?
Can't verify, but someone told me before I even signed the first Royal Vic that they had already been providing the same products in Guam. And I was like, okay, I guess they found a way to get, and nobody else could get us masks at the time. So I said, okay, well, let's give them a shot. We'll give them a timeline, or at least that was, nobody else said they could do it in a short amount of time.
I see. And who told you that they provided PPEs on Guam?
No, this is something I heard later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said that you're not involved in the negotiations for all of the contracts, but who typically does negotiate things like prices, if not you?
Quite frankly, it's an operation of the Homeland Security Emergency Management. That's their job to go out and procure services or get resources, respond to the emergency. So they would be responsible for doing it.
And did operations negotiate the prices specifically with International Royal?
I don't know.
What about with MedFarm?
No, not to my knowledge. I don't know what negotiations they had at the time. But by the time it got to me, again, I was more talking to them about logistics, how to get it here, and nobody else was coming forth with being able to provide the same product or service.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So by the time it got to you, does that mean that, like you mentioned earlier, that you got the quotations from the COVID-19 Task Force Chairman for International Royal as well as for MedFarm?
Mm-hmm.
So does, in your ICS process, does the COVID-19 task force skip the other steps to get to the point of executing the contract? Does that happen
Well,
in COVID-19?
this honestly is the first time I've worked with the task force for a response. Homeland Security at the end of the day still by law is the agency authorized to do these procurements, to do these emergency procurements. This task force was created um, just like the task force at the White House level to to be there to support and guide. So, you know, I guess you see their face in the news. If I was a storm chaser, hey, I got to get my products to this guy. He might need this. Let me give it to him. And he then passes it on to Homeland Security. And when it gets to Homeland Security to get to a contract, we still have to sort of follow the same process. The requester now, instead of CHCC, might be the task force. They'll give that to Homeland Security, and they'll run it through their process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you shed some additional light on why the governor signed off on the MedFarm contract? S.A. de Leon Guerrero said that that's not typical.
Yeah. So I don't know. There was. I don't think that's the only one. The reason why I sign off on contracts. I mean, of course, Homeland Security, it has to be Gerald there because he's the incident commander and the state coordinating officer. And then the AG, of course, and of course the vendor. Actually, I'd like to see the Secretary of Finance name on there maybe, so he could monitor. Other than Homeland Security providing information to finance on what they're spending, it'd probably be best if there was that extra layer where the Secretary of Finance knew exactly how much and how many contracts were going through the system, because at the end of the day, he has to find the cash flow to pay these
Sure.
vendors. My name is on there like any other disaster, for the fact that it has an extra check, it has an extra set of eyes to guide Homeland Security on the eligibility under the FEMA Public Assistance Program.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm
Yeah.
just short on time. So the question is, why was the governor's signature on that contract?
So again, I'm expenditure authority for FEMA funds, and at the end of the day, if it needed to be claimed under a FEMA reimbursement, that I signed off on it. In that event where they signed off, or they put the governor's name on a PO, it might be that because they were thinking of using another funding source, like whether it's CARES Act or a grant at OGA, I don't know. But I don't process those PRs, and I don't decide whose names to put on there. I know my responsibility and what I need to sign off.
Okay. S.A. de Leon Guerrero said that the vendor had requested the governor to sign to ensure that the vendor would get paid. Is that your understanding as well?
No.
Does the governor's signature ensure that the vendor gets prioritized?
I don't know what kind of guarantee does that, unless it, instead of a business unit, it has bank account number. um, Signature, at the end of the day, the Secretary of Finance has to make sure that, and the Treasurer has to make sure that that's paid. We have our obligations.
Sure. The special assistant also said that the governor was the one who suggested that he reach out to MedFarm for PPEs. To your knowledge, was the governor involved in discussions or consultations in this contract?
No.
Or in any other contract?
No. Yeah.
Are you aware of Homeland Security staff being directed to seek quotes for goods or services after the fact, after they had already been procured?
No, but I sorry, I'm pausing because I tend to do this myself as well. Sometimes the procurement doesn't end even when you found a vendor. It's in my experience at the Public Assistance Office, we always try and build a good file for for each contract. So we might not have an actual document from a vendor, but we may have spoken to them on the phone prior to that, and I just didn't have time to wait for his quote to add to my file. But there's many times where we actually go back and provide more supporting documentation to our files so that they are properly justified.
So it's our understanding that some of these after-the-fact procurements occurred with PPEs, such as with International Royal, MedFarm, Lynn's Hardware, among others. So if the quotes come back showing that the Commonwealth could have gotten a better price had there been quotes requested in the first place, in the case of these sole source contracts, is there any consequence to that?
No, because I mean, but good practice is to. I'm always pushing for sending out an official email to say, and if you look at our guidelines, what's 12 hours? The minimum of 12 hours at the lowest competitive to say, hey, by tomorrow, close the business day, can you please give me a quote? And if they don't submit it in by that time, they're already disqualified. They come back the next day with the lower price. I mean, I'm sorry, I asked you to do it by this time and you weren't able to provide. We can't go, I mean, if we can go back and cancel, then I mean, that's good practice to do as well, and we should be doing that.
Right, but if the AG rejects an invoice because he was treated as an afterthought, and quotes weren't requested to begin with, does that become an expense of the Commonwealth rather than something that we can submit for reimbursement?
Yeah, if I mean, in any contract that doesn't get properly executed, then becomes I mean, then there'd be consequences of having to deal with that. And if you receive the service and you can't return, or then there's consequences to deal with.
Okay. So I guess one question I wanted to ask, again about the contract negotiation process. S.A. De Leon Guerrero had mentioned that meals were supposedly capped at $10, but meals at Canoa and PIC ranged from $20 to $60 a piece. And PPE prices, as Rep. Lipon has highlighted, do seem to be greatly inflated, even taking into account the shortages and the cost of shipping. So as you know, FEMA operates on a reimbursement basis, and there is a CNMI cost share. So my question for you is why not try to get the best price for the Commonwealth? Why didn't these negotiations, at least from what you've said, why didn't they include a negotiation of price?
They always do. I mean, you always have to consider price, but price might not have the same weight as another factor. But in the case of meals, let's say, for example, at the hotels charging more than if we were able to get the food from an outside source. For us, it was we were trading off, and it was more costly for the hotels to bring in their kitchen staff and operate a full kitchen to do it, and I couldn't get that number down, quite frankly, but it was an advantage for us to have it within that contract because they would know the number of, I mean, they kept track of the guests every and all the meals they needed for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was going to be delivered at a certain time. And they were also flexible to some nutritional needs that they might have versus we knew our frontliners were okay with a meal from Jay's or Shirley's versus the needs of the guests, and we wanted to accommodate them as best we could. It's not to answer your question also on FEMA, it's not being a question cost there. They understand that it would cost more coming from.
Sure, but you
the
do
hotel.
acknowledge that there were other contracts, significant contracts, that you did not participate in, and the prices were already negotiated somewhere else by the time they got to you. Like with International Royal, like with MedFarm.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay. Were you aware before today that it appears that the biggest contracts awarded in COVID-19 happened to go to campaign contributors for the governor?
I don't know who contributes to this campaign, but many businesses do and many private individuals do.
And to your
I would assume.
knowledge, has the governor been involved in any way, directly or indirectly, in the solicitation, negotiation, discussion, consultation, or award of these contracts?
No, just myself.
Okay. Are you aware of the complaint from that meals vendor that we discussed in the earlier session today, Galaxy, and the reason why the meal orders were canceled?
Not.
You were
No.
not involved in that?
No.
At our previous session with you, you said that FEMA does not reimburse for hazardous pay. And would you also agree that FEMA does not reimburse for overtime that violates Commonwealth or federal policy?
Sure. Yes, I would agree. And anything that doesn't comply with our rules and regulations, if it's found to be in non-compliant, then it would not be reimbursed. But if it is, then of course within the program's guidelines and eligible.
Does FEMA reimburse for dual compensation?
If it's in the CNMI rules and regulations for paying out those employees,
It's
then
actually prohibited in the CNMI rules and regulations.
so then if it's prohibited, then it would not be.
Is there dual
Reimbursable.
compensation happening right now in COVID-19?
There was, for the first 90 days, and I'm a member of the community just like everyone is here, and I do hear even my friends on our picnic table would ask questions like that, and my answer to it is, I explain what we do and how we function as a response team, response group, and we're very mindful. One, if it's not gonna ever be paid out by FEMA or another federal funding source, that it's gonna be damaging to our government operations in these times. We're already dealing with a deficit for the last few years. So I offer advice to Homeland and say, so in the first 90 days, we were doing a lot of work while people were at home, and if we were getting paid to do that work, additional pay than what others were getting staying home. And if it wasn't going to be FEMA reimbursable, then it would be covered under another funding source identified by the administration, who decided that that's what they were to pay workers during that time.
So the answer then is yes, there was dual compensation happening in the
I don't know
first
what the
90
term
days.
is, but there was additional compensation. Yeah.
Earlier also we discussed the reassignment of the ROTA Homeland Security representative to be the finance chief in COVID-19. And so we are paying for lodging at Surfrider, car rental, per diem, as well as overtime or double pay. Is this typical in a disaster or emergency? And how much longer can we expect that to continue?
Actually, I don't know. I missed that part this morning. But you're referring to the finance section chief at Homeland Security being here. Actually, just before COVID, my office, the public assistance office, actually brought her to Saipan to assist Gerald and his team in some pending reimbursements from U2. So as allowed under our state management costs, we brought her over. I think we got her a vehicle and paid for her stay. She was supposed to be here for a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks turned into, I think, we added another 2 weeks because there was still more work to do. And then just at the tail end, She was, we got hit by, or we got declared for COVID-19, and she's a trusted individual and skilled in her position. I think Gerald wanted to keep her. Since then, we transferred the cost from my office to Homeland. I don't know how he handled it from there. I don't know if she's still an employee uh, of the Rhoda office or if she's since transferred here. I don't know, and I don't make those decisions. She's not a staff of mine.
Okay, but you do still work under Homeland Security. I mean, you have that other hat, right, with Homeland Security? So is there another finance chief?
No,
Or has there been another finance chief?
no,
Okay.
no.
And last couple of questions. So it's our understanding that fire cadets from Rhoda are being transferred here as well to do some work in data entry. Is that correct? Is that something that you approved?
I'm not aware that they're being transferred over here,
Okay.
but I think I know what you might be referring to. It's probably for the airport arrival of passengers to assist in the registration, but I'm not gonna assume. I don't know. Don't know.
So
the
you're
answer
not
to it.
involved in that?
No.
Who is
Yeah.
involved in that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you involved in the diversion of any government resources to support the governor's trip to the Northern Islands?
No.
Okay. Are you aware, though, of the generators that were used and whether those were federally funded?
No. I'm not aware of any resources.
Okay. And my final question. Could you provide this committee with the status listing of all public assistance projects, 428, hazard mitigation, all public assistance projects dating back to Sodalor and U2, and what percentage of those have been closed and what percentage of those are still open?
Give me
At a later date.
at a later date,
Yes.
definitely.
Thank you.
I have a working document that I continually update, and be happy to provide that to you.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan, and I will give Rep. Probst one last question, and then we'll call it. We'll be out here in about 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, if you would pull it up. Gar, thank you again. We're going to be wrapping up. I just wanted to bring up some concerns that have been brought to everyone's attention because this was in the Mariners Variety. It was on the newspaper, and this is dated back to June 8. And there was an article that said, Governor, DPS chief hasn't been paid for overtime. And it says, an official document indicates that DPS Commissioner Robert Guerrero is requesting 41 hours of overtime pay. And it continues, and then it says, and I quote, this is from the governor, I want to make sure that these hours are calculated, but in terms of payment, none of them, being the cabinet members, no cabinet members have been paid. We want to make sure that all of our employees get paid first before any cabinet members are paid overtime. That was one article, and it's supposed to be up, so technical difficulties. And then the next day, there was another one that also stated cabinet members have not been paid overtime. And it was again covered on KKMP in an interview. And it said that no one has been paid for this, and it was repeated that so we were under the assumption that no cabinet members got any compensation until we got documents that proved otherwise. So then we were told, well, that's not overtime, that's 1.0. Okay, what do you mean by 1.0? It's because we have a new title, and that was the concern. Okay, now bear with me on this. The reason why I'm asking these questions is because you remember after U2, right? Or that there was massive overtime collected by cabinet members. No one doubted their hard work. A lot of us were volunteering and doing work. We were never doubting that. But the amounts that they were given compared to the frontline workers, we always talk about frontline workers, some of them who were clearing the roads and doing hard physical backbreaking labor were paid a pittance, a tithing, compared to some of what cabinet members were being paid. And Gar, if you recall, after you two, some of them collected 36,000, 29,000, 27,000, 26,000. These are big amounts for simply overtime. So we brought up those concerns and we reached out to FEMA. And I want to read to you what was told by us on this. And I quote from a high-ranking FEMA official. For the Commonwealth to be reimbursed for the expenses related to the overtime you're referring to, the CNMI must first incur the expense. The expenses FEMA reimburses must be reasonable and within existing CNMI policy. Some of the test of reasonableness is to determine if the expenses, overtime recipients and rates, cabinet members, are paid out during non-declared emergencies when there is not federal reimbursement. So with that question, Gar, to your recollection, as best you can, when we don't have emergencies, you and all cabinet members, appointed officials, are salaried, right? You're exempted employees.
Correct.
You guys do work overtime hours. I mean, you work beyond the 8-hour day, right? I mean, if you get called in, the governor calls you in on a Friday night, do you go? On a non-emergency. If he were to call you in, you would go. Yes.
Most likely, yes.
Most likely. Because you guys serve at the pleasure of the governor, correct? He's appointed you. So the question is that because you are salaried and you are cabinet members, you are used to working beyond the 8-hour days. That's why exempted employees, that status is not just for cabinet members, it's for private employees and others covered under FMLA. So the reason why I'm asking this is that we were assured by the governor, who said no overtime is going to go out until we pay our frontline workers, and we find out afterwards through this pandemic that cabinet members were in fact being paid. Some have already claimed well over $15,000 during this pandemic. And at the time, what upset a lot of furloughed employees and others who were laid off was these huge sums of money. No one is saying that you didn't deserve it. The question is it legal? When we asked this morning, Gerald Guerrero, who requested for these waivers for the cabinet members, he said that they didn't consult with an attorney or legal advice on that. And I was surprised because we did. We talked to not just our legal counsels, but outside counsel to get advice on this as well. And they did agree with our discussion or our opinion that it would be difficult to receive 2 different paychecks because of CNMI law, that bars dual compensation or dual employment. Because you're basically accepting or taking 2 paychecks. And the law clearly states that if you are to engage in such work, such employee shall be placed in leave without pay from the regular position. But we have found out from our discussions that no cabinet member took leave without pay, correct? So these 2 paychecks that were being received, whether you deserved it or not, were still being compensated after the governor had said no one is going to get paid, and then they were paid. And my point, that I guess, that I'm trying to make on all of this is that if this is not reimbursed by FEMA, and we have scarce or very little money, then how are we allowing this overtime or this double pay 1.0, whatever you want to call it, to continue? With that question, Gar, are any cabinet members continuing to receive 1.0 or double pay or dual compensation, whichever word is correct?
Not to my knowledge, but before you ask follow-up questions, it sounded like you were assuming that I was a cabinet member. Just want to make it clear that I'm not
Okay,
myself.
my
Yeah.
apologies.
Right, right.
I
Okay.
stand corrected.
But not to my knowledge,
Yeah.
as of today. I mean, incurring. You mean incurring?
Yes,
and,
are they
reports and
continuing to
claiming?
receive
Yeah.
double pay? Are they?
No.
No. So no one at this point is receiving any. Do you know when this stopped?
Not that I know of. Like I said, I don't know. There's no real timeline to put to transition from heavy response to say, hey, we're comfortable now. Let's throttle down. But right around day 90 of after March 13, I did advise Homeland Security and said, we got a lot in place. Let's throttle back and inform because ultimately at the end of the day he leads the operations and he would be assigning people to go to different places or requesting for services at different places and it was a simple advice to say, hey, it's 90 days after, let's pull back and
So the double pay or whatever it was received for those 90 days and not beyond. Is that correct?
that's my understanding.
Okay. And has anybody calculated how much this is going to cost if we do not get reimbursed for all appointed officials? Have they all turned in their timesheets to be compensated? And have all of them been paid or compensated?
No, and actually, as I understand, and I don't want to get caught in saying I'm going to say it myself too, but it was always my understanding as well that we that was the direction and of the governor at that time, and I don't I even sitting here I can't say that I mean knowing that I think we're talking about the cabinet member that runs DPS is that he has a project as well claiming directly with FEMA, and he could be paying himself over time using his own budget and account, and it's going to be and maybe that was the thought at the time that nobody was getting paid.
Thank
so,
you. And,
yeah.
and before I wrap up real quick, I want to say that the concern that we had was we did get copies of the hours and looked at them. And a good chunk of them, if not the majority of them, were regular daytime hours. So they were, as we understand, receiving dual compensation. They were receiving their regular paycheck, right? Their salaried paycheck. And then on top of this additional one. And one of them that struck me that was very concerning was that a person who was basically doing his normal duties and responsibilities. It wasn't like he was going out in the front line and risking his life and going up, driving a van or getting in any contact with potential COVID patients. We were talking about an appointed official who was basically attending meetings, but not doing anything frontline related. Because when I did speak and meet with the HR director for CHC in passing, she had mentioned with regard to CHC that they would have to be in the direct line of threat for them to receive such pay. And I said, okay, that makes sense. If you're risking, you're right in the line of it. I understand that. But if you're attending meetings or whatever, whether it's online or your regular job is to do that, but because it's COVID related, you automatically get dual compensation. How is that fair to everyone else? That is where we've had issues, this legislature. And although some of my colleagues may not want to admit it, we've talked about these things that are concerning. So as I mentioned earlier, Gar, it is my hope as a governor's authorized representative that we can have a better, more cordial relationship when it comes to communicating these things and discussing these concerns, because we all have to be fiscally conservative. And if we continue to pour out this money and dual pay or whatever you want to call it, and it's concentrated at the top, it's not only affecting our financials, but it's also affecting the trust of people. You see, that's basically what I'm saying. So I just wanted to comment on that moving forward. I hope we can learn valuable lessons from what transpired so far. Thank you, Gar, for your time.
Yeah. Thank you. Noted. And in addition to Rep. Sablan's request, my office would be more than happy to provide a breakdown going back also to prior disasters. We did do a recent analysis of U2 because we're requesting for our final stretch of funding from U2. And that includes, at the end of the day, a reality check on what we're not able to get reimbursement on. Not for the not just that it was mismanaged, but also just not in compliant with the program's policies. And we'll be happy to share that with you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. And with that, that concludes our business for today. And I believe without any objections, this committee will stand in recess or adjourn to tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Guerrero.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.